If two parents have a child, they have a God-given blood bond with that kid from the day he's brought into the world. And it affords you certain things with your relationship. You have, for example, automatic love from your kids. You have automatic grace and forgiveness. You get automatic respect with this attachment bond. You get automatic affection with this attachment bond. Now, a stepmother comes in and she doesn't get automatic anything. She has to earn every bit of it.
Well, she may get automatic.
But it will be pushback or resentment or
rejection.
Exactly.
Or rejection.
Because she's a new person on the block at that point.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and she's often viewed as a person I don't want in the circle.
From the Family Life Podcast Network, this is Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast brings together timeless wisdom and practical help and hope to blended families and those who love them. I'm so glad you've joined us in this journey. Welcome to episode 55, The Smart Stepmom. Hey, do you like learning from home? Well, if you do, periodically I'm teaching virtual classes on Zoom. We'd love to have you join us. To find out how, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter. Check the show notes to learn how. Okay, today we've got another, what I like to call Family Life Today flashback for you. Laura Petherbridge and I published a book called The Smart Stepmom, and a few years ago, we were invited to be on the radio broadcast of Family Life Today. Now, this is before I joined staff here at Family Life. Periodically on this Family Life Blended podcast, we like to share with you conversations that originally took place on Family Life Today because the principles are timeless. So the first voices you're going to hear are those of Dennis Rainey, the host of Family Life Today at that time, and Bob Lepine. I was a guest along with co-author Laura Petherbridge. Laura is an international speaker and author who serves couples and single adults on a variety of topics. She has authored and co-authored 4 books and frequently appears in the national media. Laura has spoken many times for Family Life Blended at our Blended and Blessed event and our Summit on Stepfamily Ministry event. She and her husband Steve live in Georgia and have 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. You can learn more about her work at thesmartstepmom.com. Now, let me tell you, there is so much packed into this conversation for stepmoms, but let me be clear. This is also for you biological dads. We preach being a team a lot around here at Family Life Blended, so let me encourage you to listen together to this episode and discuss the implications for your marriage and family. It's a great way to build teamwork into your home, so I hope you'll both listen and talk about what you hear. And if you stepdads are feeling a little left out, don't worry, we've got an episode coming up for you real soon. Okay, so here is our latest Family Life Today flashback on Family Life Blended, The Smart Stepmom.
You know, we get a lot of emails from listeners, but one of the things I've seen listeners say a lot that has been encouraging is we appreciate the fact that you guys don't put a veneer on what's going on in families.
Right.
You tell it like it is.
Try to be authentic.
Now, we do get some folks who write from time to time and say, it sounds like it's just a Beaver Cleaver perfect family when we listen to Family Life Today.
I'm not sure what broadcast they're listening to because I've shared enough of my mistakes on this broadcast that I don't think the Cleavers ever experienced. But we have a pair of people joining us on the broadcast today who know about a different type of family other than the Cleavers. Ron Deal and Laura Petherbridge join us on Family Life Today. Laura, Ron, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are, you've collaborated to write a book on step families. You've written a book called The Smart Stepmom. Ron, you've been in this area ministering for now close to 2 decades. Mm-hmm. Had a vital ministry counseling and writing and training in churches across the country. Laura, you've done a number of divorce workshops and have created material there. And this issue is a relevant issue today. Ron, you were telling me that over 10 million stepmoms today?
And that's a conservative estimate in the United States, over 10 million stepmoms. And it actually could be quite a bit higher than that, but with the census doesn't keep the kind of records that they used to. Stepmoms are very, very common within the church and within their communities in the United States.
And Laura, you're one of the 10 million, right?
That's right, for more than 24 years.
And tell us a little bit of your story. How did you become a stepmom?
Well, I went through a divorce in 1984, and then a couple years later, I'm remarried. And the man that I married had 2 children, and they were 11 and 13 at the time.
And did you know what you were getting yourself into?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, but you actually grew up in a home that had 2 stepmoms as a child.
That's
and
right.
As an adult growing up, right?
That's right. I've had 2 stepmoms of my own, so I falsely assumed that would prepare me for being a stepmom, and that was wrong.
What one word would you use to describe your stepmoms? Pick 2 words, one for each. Just as stepmoms.
Oh, for my own stepmoms.
Yeah, from your own experience.
The first stepmom, I would say jealous. The second stepmom, I would say compassionate.
So you did have a little bit of a picture of what not to do and what to do when you became a stepmom, but you said you still weren't prepared for it.
Yes. I mean, I knew some basic things like try not to become their mother, but I was older when my dad remarried the 3rd time. So, my second stepmom, his 3rd marriage, was a little different because I was an adult, so I approached it a little bit differently. But yeah, my first stepmom, I realized as time went on that she was just very jealous of him having 2 children with a former marriage.
And Ron, is that the number one mistake stepmoms make, assuming they can step in to be a mom? And
I think so. I think, we have in our society and our culture what we call the motherhood mandate. And that is simply the idea that women are the emotional connectors in the family. They're the ones who caretake, and they're also the ones who connect emotionally with people in the family and kind of the centerpiece, if you will. Well, if a stepmother comes in and tries to take that center place, there's already a mother. Even if she's deceased, there's already a mother. And so she may feel like that the expectation of her is that she become the emotional connector. She may believe that that's really what she wants. And also, by the way, that takes care of her because she moves from an outside role to an inside role once she's emotionally connected with everybody. But as she tries to move into that place and move mom out, that's a huge mistake.
a lot of resistance occurs there.
Absolutely. It just emboldens the resistance, I think, within children, whether they be children or adults,
As I was reading through your book, I was struck by the quotes from stepmoms that you have in there. Every one of the quotes, it seems, drips with emotion.
Absolutely.
Disappointment, discouragement, unmet expectations. This is really what you were attempting to do as you wrote this. You wanted to come alongside stepmoms and help them understand what normal is.
That's right, because stepmothers typically feel very lonely. They feel very isolated. They feel ostracized and outside of the family circle. And they feel very rejected, sometimes even by their husband. And so what the goal, in particular in the beginning of the book, is to show other stepmoms, we understand your pain. These feelings are perfectly normal, and there is a way to overcome them.
It seems like there almost ought to be a Surgeon General's warning on the side of being a stepmom. I mean, for somebody who is considering a blended marriage relationship, whether they're bringing their own kids in or they're stepping into an existing family structure, there almost ought to be a timeout to say, you just need a real sober assessment of what you're about to do, because the dynamics here, Ron, are really significant, aren't they?
Yeah, and really what we're saying is you can be a great stepmother, have a wonderful step-family relationship. It's something you grow into, that the family will grow together over time. We just want to get your expectations set. For that woman who's in the dating experience, looking down the road, thinking about marrying a man who has children, what's my role, what's my place going to be? We want her expectations in the right place so she understands that there's a process here and that she may not ever, in the children's heart, take on that mother figure kind of role. She might, but she may not. Or even more confusing, she might have that role with some of the children, but not with all of the children. And so just to understand that and to go in with her eyes open and her expectations in the right place sets her up for greater success. And here's something I believe. More stepmoms are successful than they know, but they're trying so hard. And then
and more than likely, their standards are so high.
That's right. They're trying to fulfill that motherhood mandate. And what we want them to know is that there's just a different standard. It's a different dynamic for a stepmother's relationship. Again, it can be great, wonderful, even beyond your expectations. But don't assume that you're going to become mom.
And you said it's going to take time. Are you saying months, years?
Well, we've talked on this program before about how it generally takes step families 5 to 7 years to really kind of integrate, to pull the family members in. I call it cooking. It takes a while to cook. And how long does it take a stepmother to really get into a place where she feels some peace and feels connected emotionally and knows what her role is? Well, it depends. It depends on so many factors. The age of the children, whether they're part-time or full-time children, all kinds of things make a difference there. Again, what I would wish for stepmothers is that they would enjoy what they have today, rather than living and longing for what they don't have today.
Yeah, look at the glass and it's half empty.
And go with what God has given you and grow with that.
Laura, as you started your journey as a stepmom, undoubtedly, well, you admit in your book, you had high expectations and you were instantly disappointed. How did it manifest itself with your husband's children?
Yes, I really think, I was going to come in and be this wonderful Christian role model in their life and influence them and get them in church. I was just had all these expectations of what a wonderful Christian example I was going to be for them. And then when it gets down to the day-to-day stuff, it's just so different than what you think it's going to be. It's just so much harder than you think it's going to be. And stepmoms often feel guilty that they don't love their stepchildren as much as they either think they should or as much as they love their own children. Now, I didn't have my own biological children, so I didn't have that comparison, but other stepmoms tell me all the time, I feel so guilty because I don't love his kids in exactly the same way that I love my own. So I think that's one of the first things, is to lower your expectations for the role that you are going to be or become in the lives of these children. And so that's what I had to do.
Take us to early in your marriage when you had to learn that. I mean, what was one of the first situations that occurred at the grassroots level, on the mundane, everyday life that stepmoms face that you had to face?
Yes, I had to realize certain things were not a hill to die on. For example, I was going to get us all eating really healthy and having these really healthy meals. Well, my stepkids weren't doing that in their other home, in their biological home. So, of course, when they came to my home, there's going to be resistance to that. It wasn't my job to try to change that in their life. They have a mom, they have a dad. Those are the two people in their lives that should be seeing that they're eating healthy or going to church or any of those things. It wasn't my job. And so I had to learn to let go of the things that were not my job as a stepmother, and to only focus on becoming as godly of an example and influence and role model in their lives as they would let me become.
So take us to the dinner table. You got kids who won't eat it, pushing back.
Yep.
Do you engage your husband at this point and ask him to step in, or do you call a timeout, step into another room, and have a little caucus between husband and wife and say, how are we going to handle this?
Yeah, it has to become between the stepmom and her husband. How important is this in our home to you as the dad? And then depending on how important it is to him, that's how much further you can take it.
And Laura has just introduced one of the most foundational concepts to a successful stepmother, and that is she works with her husband. And, what she's saying is it wasn't her job to get them eating right. Well, if her husband wants his kids eating right, she can partner with him and she can make that happen. But if the stepmother is trying to assert new rules, new standards of conduct, new ways of behavior, and none of the biological parents want that, meaning biological mom in the other home or biological dad, he doesn't really care about that, then it's not going to happen. I mean, it's just going to create more conflict in this particular situation. So for her to go kind of behind closed doors, as you suggested, and have that powwow with her husband and figure out what the standard's going to be, and then together kind of present that standard, that position of unity is going to actually get things done, and it's going to empower the stepmother to be able to follow through.
So if he says, this healthy eating thing, it's really not that big a deal to me, I'm thinking of you going, well, it ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I did. That's what I did wrong. I would try to push the issues that I felt were important. Now, when you get into moral issues, that's where it gets really, really difficult. Is I get emails from stepmoms constantly. Their issue isn't food. They're not dealing with a food issue. They're dealing with something like the teenage son's looking at pornography, or the stepchild is coming into the home and swearing at her, calling her terrible names, and she doesn't know how to respond to that.
Oh, let's take the teenage son looking at pornography and a stepmom. What's she to do? At that point, it is a moral issue, and you know what's best for him at that point. Mm-hmm. Do we follow the same scenario of you and your husband getting off, caucusing again, talking about it? And what if he doesn't do anything any different, doesn't think it's a big issue?
Let's take this in layers because it's an excellent question. And again, there's not one single answer. Let's remember that a stepmother's role is going to develop and change over time. If this is a stepmother who's been in the life of this child for many years, they have a good bonded relationship, and she feels like she's got enough money in the bank with this young man, she can address him directly. What if, however, she's in the early years of this experience and this young man really doesn't give a rip about her opinion about this, then she simply doesn't have the power. She wishes she had it, but she just doesn't with this young man. At that point, she really has to go to her husband. She really has to work with him. If he embraces this and understands this is something that needs to be addressed, they can figure out a plan as a team. If he doesn't think it's a big deal, or if he says, yes, it's a big deal, but he won't follow through.
Or if he kind of dismisses it because he's got a problem with pornography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's in a very disempowered place. It's not hopeless, but the reality is, how much influence does she have? She has to try to work with her influence where it is. And in this scenario that we're talking about, that would be through her husband. But if he's not willing to do it, then she has to, I think, assert some boundaries. I think she could say things for her own personal space. There may be younger children in the home. So she may have to say some things like, I'm sorry, you're not going to be allowed to use the family computer. I guarantee you it's going to create conflict and a battle in the home. And ultimately what this comes down to is whether or not dad will deal with his son.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to draw attention to something you said earlier because it was one of those ahas for me as you were talking about this. A stepmom feels like she ought to have a level of authority in the family structure because, after all, she's an adult.
Exactly.
And she's a mom.
And she's paying for a lot of stuff.
That's right.
Well, there's not just the authority, but there's the heart of wanting to be a mother.
That's right.
And maybe the dream has been realized.
But you said that rather than seeing her position as one of authority, she really needs to reframe it as one of influence. And start to look at how can I be an influencer in the lives of these children, and even in my husband's life, if there are some of these issues that need to be worked out. Again, not from a position of here's how we're going to do it, but from a position of how can I help and how can I influence and change the climate and adjust the thermostat around here?
Essentially, the stepmother's role comes down to relationship. The more relationship she has, the more influence she has with the children. And that will come with the passage of time as they grow together as a family, if you will.
Say that again, Ron.
Essentially, step-parenting and for the stepmother, it comes down to relationship with the children.
The deeper the relationship,
the more authority she has with the kids, the more influence she has with the children. It's a matter of timing. Being an active, engaged, what we might call authoritative parent is a matter of timing for the stepmother. She has to earn the relationship. See, here's one of the foundational issues we discuss in this book, and it's attachment. A lot of people just don't understand how attachment works. If two parents have a child, they have a God-given blood bond with that kid from the day he or she's brought into the world. And it is an indescribable relationship with your children. It is the kind of thing that never goes away, never passes away, and it affords you certain things with your relationship. You have, for example, automatic, what I like to call automatic love from your kids. You have automatic grace and forgiveness. You ever apologize to one of your children? I've had to do that more often than I would like to admit. But you know what? They take me back. They don't even blink, and they forgive, and they throw their arms around me, and we move on. You get automatic respect with this attachment bond. You get automatic affection with this attachment bond. Now, a stepmother comes in, and she doesn't get automatic anything. She has to earn every bit of it.
Well, she may get automatic.
But it will be pushback or resentment or
rejection.
Exactly.
Or rejection.
Because she's a new person on the block at that point.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and she's often viewed as a person I don't want in the circle. Dad and I were getting along perfectly fine before you entered the picture. And you have actually come, the stepmom in their eyes, in the children's eyes, has come between the relationship that the child had with the parent. So she is not viewed as an ally. She is often viewed as the enemy and the person that it is my job as the child to get you out of this family. And so there's usually a mission in the eyes of stepchildren to get the stepmother out.
How many kids have you ever run into that said, someday I hope I'll have a step-parent? It's just not part of the fantasy we have of life. By the way, that works the other side. How many women do you know that have ever said, someday I hope to be a stepmother? It's not necessarily a role that is embraced and welcomed. The children, what Laura is saying is that children don't have the same commitment to the success of the marriage as the couple does.
You ever thought about the fact that in a lot of cartoons, the character that is the personification of evil is a stepmother? You ever thought about that?
I haven't. But one of our authors described herself as a wicked stepmother.
Yes, it really, it sounds bad, but it's really, the reason I put that in the book is because I want other stepmoms to understand that it's normal to feel that way. I can remember looking in the mirror one day thinking, what have I become? Because I was feeling so wicked about all the issues that we were dealing with as a family and some of the emotions I was having towards my stepkids. And I thought,
like what?
Well, just some days wishing that their mother would move to another state and I wouldn't have to see them for 6 months. It's a terrible thing to even say. But if I'm being totally honest, and I'm speaking for a lot of stepmoms that contact me, their desire is that the stepkids would move far, far away. So you just wouldn't have to deal with it all the time.
So you want them out of your life.
Exactly. And I know that sounds very unchristian. It doesn't sound very loving. But if we're being honest, that is often the thought that is going across the stepmom's mind is, this is so much more complicated than I thought it was going to be. Maybe if they just weren't here, it wouldn't be so difficult.
I don't think I've ever admitted this on Family Life Today, but I think Barbara and I had some days with our kids.
I was thinking the same thing.
If there had been a box to have checked, could there be a chance of our kids moving away for maybe 6 hours? Maybe it wasn't 6 months.
There were times when we sent them off to summer camp and just said, thank you, Lord, for summer camp.
Yeah.
Just for a little breather here.
But I can really understand, Laura, although I obviously have never been a step-parent, I can understand how that would create all kinds of guilty feelings and shame that you even have the thought.
Absolutely, because I think as a biological parent, when you think that, there's a part of you that knows that's a little bit normal. But as a stepmom, there's a part, in particular, if you're a Christian, there's a feeling inside of you that you don't love these children in exactly the same way you either love your own children or you love your own family members. And there's a guilt that goes along with that. So it's different than the biological parent, being glad that the kid's going off to camp, because it's just a different family dynamic.
And I think part of this guilt is rooted in self-blame. Stepmoms are really hard on themselves.
Yes.
As Laura and I did the research for this book and talked with stepmoms, and we developed a team of stepmoms who advised us about different aspects of the book. That's one of the things we heard over and over and over again. And in my counseling with step families is this sense of blame. Stepmoms try so very hard. And if they keep kind of beating their head against a wall and can't quite get into a child's heart or can't quite figure out how to deal with the power issues and being a parent and so on, they really, really struggle. And oftentimes they just feel so isolated and alone. They don't know what else to do. They kind of blame themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a scenario I imagine, and tell me if this is kind of a typical scenario. A woman who either has her own children or maybe she's never been married, but she is met this guy. She's in love with the guy. They've started dating. She's met the kids. She likes the kids. They seem to like her. They've done some fun stuff together. The kids have affirmed her. They've said some really sweet things to her. And as she and the guy are thinking about getting married, she goes, I know this is going to be challenging, but I really think this is going to work. And so she's hopeful. She has a lot of hope for what's coming up.
And really, that's rooted in the idea that dating is going to be reflective of actual married life. And I think one of the cruelties of this for many people is that dating is inconsistent with
step family or first family, the dating relationship. And
That's right.
And the marriage.
It's not a real picture of a relationship.
Exactly.
Is it?
Yep.
But let me jump ahead now. The mom is married to the husband, and all of a sudden, the kids are not acting the way they were acting during the courtship phase. In fact, she's seeing anger in them she's never seen before. It feels to her like they're starting to sabotage the marriage, trying to come between her and her husband. And this job of step-parenting is much harder than she ever imagined it was going to be. And she's wondering, I don't know that I'm cut out for this. I don't know that I can do this and do it well. Is that fairly, have I described it?
It sure is. And one of the things that you're mentioning, which is very realistic, is that the stepmom thinks that the children will just continue to embrace her and that they will want a new mother. But in reality, in particular, if there's been a divorce, when a parent remarries after a divorce, it kills the dream for children that their parents will reconcile. So part of the reason children are so resistant to a new step-parent is that all of a sudden...
The parent trap isn't going to happen the way
That's
it did in the
absolutely
movies. Yeah.
right. You are never... This is the reality. Now daddy cannot go back to mommy because he's got a new wife.
In effect, the new marriage is another loss
Yes.
for the children, stacked upon the previous losses that they've had. I think one of the things that we really try to help stepmoms understand in this book is that if you're a stepmother, you're a grief counselor. Because you and yourself, you're going to go through some losses, but the children that you're helping to raise, and if you have your own biological children, everybody goes through some transition that basically represents loss, and that's tagged on top of the losses that got you into this situation, whether the biological mother passed away or there was a divorce. You're a grief counselor. The loss is just going to be carried right into the new family experience on through the years. It's not just going to dwindle down and go away. It's going to be there for the duration.
Well, I just have to ask at this point, given what we've just laid out, should anybody even try this? There's part of me that goes,
Sure.
We're talking about one of the most complicated, difficult assignments could be handed to somebody. Do this at your own risk. Or should you just leave well enough alone and not try to make this happen?
Bob, you said a key word there, risk. I truly believe that, life is a risk in a sense, and marriage is a risk. I always tell people you're always working on your marriage because your marriage is always working on you.
Right.
I mean, God uses it to disciple us, to train us, to refine us. And the same thing is going to be true of a stepmother experience. She's going to encounter some things she didn't count on. She didn't know she was going to need grace for. And it's going to transform her and deepen her love and her ability to walk with grace if she'll listen and learn from the experience. But we do want people to have their eyes open. And I think it's an interesting notion to tell people who are dating that as a single parent, it's a legitimate option to stay single, to raise your kids, and to do a good job with that. But the step-parent experience can also be incredibly rewarding for people. Oftentimes, they have to travel a bit of a journey before they get to the rewards. And that's the encouragement we want people to realize. The risk does bring reward.
The risk actually is seen in the statistics around the number of blended families that end in divorce. It's actually higher than first-time marriages.
Definitely.
And it goes up with every successive marriage. What exactly are the statistics, Ron?
Well, the remarriage divorce rate is at least 60%. If we refine that to couples who are remarried with stepchildren, it's 66%, around two-thirds.
So it goes up even higher.
That's right. In a third marriage, according to the U.S. Census, the divorce rate is about 71%. Wow. So there are challenges that come with children being added to the marriage package. What I like to say is, it's one thing to be a couple, it's another thing to be a family.
And if somebody is considering a blended marriage right now, they're listening and they go, this sounds really scary, then good. I mean, we have sobered them appropriately.
Absolutely.
If somebody's on the other side of the fence, they're already in a blended marriage and they're going, I knew it was hard. You guys are just confirming what I've already been experiencing. Well, good, because there is hope, Laura, when somebody realizes, okay, I'm not atypical. What I'm experiencing as a step-parent is not unusual, right?
Yes. One of the number one things that stepmoms say to me when they come to my workshop on this topic is it's just so wonderful to be around other stepmoms that think and feel and have sharing that what I'm feeling is normal. Sometimes just knowing that what we're feeling is normal is there's a comfort in that. And so that's absolutely true. And I think too the mistake is that we think that we learned from our past mistakes. So often, in particular, if you've been a divorced person and you're remarrying, you think, well, I learned how to do marriage from, I learned what I did wrong from my first. And that's really untrue. We really do not learn from our mistakes unless we learn why we made those mistakes. And so it's not uncommon to go on and make those mistakes again. So it really is taking a good look in the mirror at why did I get into this marriage? And now what am I going to do? It's a complicated marriage. And for me, I had to get to a place where even though, there were times when I wanted to bail. I say that in the book. There were times I just wanted to run from all of it. And, I thought singleness wasn't too fun, but this is worse. And so
you're talking about bailing from the marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm being honest, there were moments when I thought, you know what? I'd just as soon go back to being single than dealing with all of this. And I had to get to a point of where I said, you know what? I made a vow before God, before my husband, that I am not going to get divorced again. And I just prayed, Lord, you're going to have to teach me how to love these children and how to do this. I know that you can teach me. If I will look to you, you will give me the heart and the mind and the ability to do this if I will seek you on it. And that's really where that was where it began, the turning.
And that's the risk. You see, what Laura said was, Lord, teach me. And she opened herself up to learning what she needed to learn in order to make the relationships work. That's one of the biggest risks. And you stop and you think about it. So many stepmothers are there and they've already been through a divorce themselves. They've already had some loss and tragedy in their life. And they've shut down from risk. They have gone into self-protection mode and they are no longer willing. I can tell you that in a study I did with Dr. David Olson that's given birth to another book that will be out at some point in the future, we found that one of the highest predictors of remarriages that come apart is fear. It's simply the unwillingness to endure risk, to learn, to grow, to be humbled by it, and to grow through it. But once you get afraid, once you begin to lock down, once you begin to say to yourself, you know what, in a remarriage, I don't know how to do that. There's a whole lot of risk involved with that. I think I'll go where I find safety and security, and that's back into being single again or being a single parent again. Then all of a sudden you've shut down and there's no hope for the marriage.
You'd be amazed at the number of stepmoms that have contacted me, emailed me, and said, when I pull in the driveway of my home and I know the stepkids are there, I feel exactly the same way as I did when I would pull into my home when I was married to an abusive husband. So that's that kind of fear that is triggered in them. It's that same feeling of I'm out of control. There's people here who are hurting me. I feel ostracized. I feel lonely. I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. So she's really needing her spouse, her husband, to come alongside her, the father to come alongside and help her with this process because they are his children. If they were her children, she could set certain boundaries with them. That's a little bit easier. But because it's his children, he's going to have to partner with her in order to get whatever's going on in the home that she feels so much fear going in there. They're going to have to work together as a team to get rid of that fear, that abusiveness that is going on there, because alone, she really does not have the power without him beside her because they're not her biological children.
So the first principle is that cannot be allowed to happen.
Absolutely. The father in that situation has got to take charge. Now, I'm going to assume, because it's gotten to that point, that he is not taking charge, that he is not an engaged father, but he's passive and he's letting things happen. for whatever reason. And I'm not thinking here of a stepmom who's in a necessarily physically abusive environment, but in an environment where she tries to implement change. She tries to follow through with her role as a stepmother, but she gets sabotaged by her husband or what else happens in the home. One of the things we talk about in the book is what we call politely resigning. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to throw a mother into a place where she's responsible for getting the kids to pick up their room and take care of their stuff and do their chores. But every time she tries, they just say no. They go to appeal to Dad. Dad says, hey, it's not a big deal. She's stuck. And one of the things she can do is say, to her husband, I think it's time for me to no longer be responsible for getting them to make their beds. Obviously, that's not something that's important to you, and so I'm going to just back out of that. If you want them to make their beds, I'll let you handle that. And she politely resigns from trying to be an authority when she's not allowed to be the authority. And we hope what that would create is a little bit of a vacuum in the home. Dad walks around, notices nobody ever makes their bed, and clothes are all over the place, and Dad decides to get motivated to create this change. Then something can happen. But until then, until he's motivated, she's going to have a difficult time.
There is one big issue, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but if there's something that's keeping Dad from getting involved, it may just be his passivity, but it may also be this overwhelming sense of guilt that he carries around with him. I put these kids in this position through the failure of my first marriage. If I had done better, and it's almost like he's thinking, I've got to let them act out the way they're acting out because I bear the responsibility. How does Dad get past that?
He has to walk straight through guilt, straight into his fear that somehow putting his wife into the front seat of his heart is going to cause his children irreparable pain, and he's going to cause them more difficulty. He's got to walk through that and act out of trust that is the right thing to do, that eventually that will bring stability to his children's lives, even though initially it may bring some instability to their lives.
So you're saying commitment to his wife.
That's exactly right.
Is the strongest gift he can give his children.
That's exactly right. Now, initially, Dennis, and this is really important because I don't want to convey an idea that initial commitment is just going to be happiness for his children. It's probably going to create them some pain because they were the priority for many years, especially in the single-parent years. And for him to say, you know what, nope, Friday night's for my wife now, and we're going to go out on a date, and show that commitment, express that commitment, and include her in decision-making, all of those things that will make children say, well, wait a minute, we came first. What are you doing? Do you love her more than you love us? He's got to understand that will be an awkward transition for them, and they may really resent it in the beginning. But the test of time will be that provides stability for them. During that difficult transition is where a lot of men bail. Mm-hmm. It's where they don't follow through.
And we don't want to convey that we're saying that the dad is supposed to neglect his children. He brought these children into the world, so he needs to stay connected with his children. And say, for instance, Friday night is date night. Make sure then Saturday morning breakfast is with your kids. Mm-hmm. Have one-on-one time with those children, Dad and just the kids, so that they can feel like they haven't completely lost their father to this new marriage. Very, very important for him to stay connected with those kids and to say, you know what, you've had me all these years. I realize this marriage has probably caused you some fear and some anxiety and feeling like you're maybe losing touch with me, but I'm going to promise you that I am going to love my new wife, but I am never going to leave your side. So it's important for dads to verbally communicate that the new wife is not replacing the children, and he's got to spend time with the kids to do that.
You know, I'm listening to both of you here, and I know Bob's thinking the same thing at this point. There have to be those who have heard you talk about this now, and they're listening to all the costs that come with a blended family, and they're in a first-time marriage right now, and they're considering divorce.
We want them to stay in that marriage.
I want you to listen to me. Mm-hmm. You're not going to trade this one in for a better one.
Mm-hmm.
You may think it's a better one, but let me tell you something. There's a reason why the statistics are higher for a second-time marriage with children.
The degree of difficulty
increases
significantly, and it doesn't matter how much emotional bonding you may feel to somebody outside your marriage. It doesn't matter
how good they make you feel
or how bad your situation is right now in your first marriage. The degree of difficulty in establishing a blended family, a step-family relationship, is exponentially higher than it is to get things right in your first marriage.
I have a pastor friend who gives first-time married couples my previous book, The Smart Step Family, and makes them read it so that they will be even more determined to make their first marriage work.
There you go. Let's talk about having biological children of your own. In other words, having a child that you biologically create and then rear together as a couple. I mean, that's going to create additional issues for step families. Where should a couple start who are in a step family, who maybe have hers and his or just his?
Or just hers. But now they're stopping to think,
should we have an ours?
right.
You know, first of all, let me say that the research is really unclear, that we don't have an awful lot of really good research. So I can tell you anecdotally what we believe is the best advice for people in general. But honestly, every couple is going to have to decide for themselves whether they want to move towards having a child together. I do think that in general, an ours baby, as we sometimes refer to it and talk about in the book, exacerbates or continues what was. So if there is family health, if the step family is doing well, if the family is molding together and feel pretty good about the relationships, having an ours baby oftentimes even solidifies that even more. Sometimes we kind of jokingly refer to it as the concrete child because it helps solidify everything that's going on in the family.
It's not going to create something that doesn't exist.
That's right. On the other hand, if things are stressful, don't have an ours baby because it tends to add stress. It tends to work against the family coming together and against the marriage.
In that situation, it creates a quicksand.
Exactly.
Instead of concrete.
So the decision really needs to be based on what's the health of the family dynamic in the first place. And it's wrong to think that an ours baby is going to make something that isn't there, right?
An ours baby is not a solution. That's right. We want to encourage couples, obviously. That's a marvelous thing to have a child together, and it can be a great thing. Just consider the timing.
And in all this, I want to go back to the Bible, which says children are a blessing. And anybody who's had a child realizes that a child will redeem you from your selfishness. Now, in a step family, you've already experienced plenty of redemption at that point because you've had to face some of your selfishness. But what I'd want to encourage couples who are in blended families to consider as they think about this is God really encourages us to have children. If we're followers of Christ, let's create a godly legacy here. God's power has always worked through broken situations. It's a part of what life is. But a couple really need to be in agreement around this decision to have a biological child.
Laura, was an ours baby even an option for you guys when you became a stepmom?
It wasn't. It wasn't an option for physical reasons and just because I think partially, I didn't realize this at the time, but my dad with his first wife had an ours baby. And I think that had somewhat of a negative effect, even though I was a teenager already. And so I didn't have any resentment towards my half-brother. It wasn't that type of thing. As a matter of fact, I thought he was cute and great. But I do think it's one, for me, it was one more sense of, oh, so now he's got a new wife, he's got her children, and now they have their own baby. He really doesn't need us anymore.
You felt excluded?
I did. I think I felt that it just, I don't think I realized it until I became an adult and started pondering all the family dynamics, but I really feel that it caused even more of a distance in my relationship with my dad and his wife when they had another child.
We've talked already this week about the fact that you have a couple of chapters in your book, The Smart Stepmom, that are written for dads. I was just sitting here thinking, I wonder why you didn't write The Smart Stepdad at the same time you wrote The Smart Stepmom. Both of them need to be smart. It's probably the stepmom who will go buy a book and try to get some help more than a dad doing it, right?
Actually, I'm contracted to write The Smart Stepdad. Okay. It's a project that I'm be undertaking in the future. We just came out with this one first, and I'll tell you why. I think it's harder to be a stepmother than it is to be a stepfather. That's an overgeneralization, I realize, and there's always exceptions to that. But the role of stepmother is a very, very difficult role and oftentimes a very lonely role. And we really felt like that was the first person we needed to reach out to.
And kids seem to accept a stepdad more easily than they do a stepmom. We found that in a lot of our research and a lot of what we did in writing this. We don't really have the psychology behind that, but they just seem to, not that every stepdad is accepted, but they do seem to accept a stepdad better than they do a stepmom.
You say in your book there are several things a stepfather needs to consider as he provides love and leadership for his family. Share a few of those with our audience.
First and foremost, he's got to declare his loyalty to his wife before his children and before any extended family, for example. Everybody just needs to know that dad and his wife are lifers.
Does he sit down with the kids and say, kids, let me just tell you, you have just moved to the back seat, mom's in the front seat. Does he say that to him?
Well, I think he can articulate, yes, with words, his dedication to her, his promise to her, that he means that. Forsaking all others in his vows also now includes them. Now, please understand, with all things in balance. This does not mean he's neglecting his children, he's leaving them behind. He's going to love them and care for them. Just like a couple in a first family, we talk about this, we take it for granted. A couple in a first marriage and a first family, they spend time, nurturing their marriage relationship and giving lots of time and energy to their kids during those child-rearing years. There's a balance there. Well, this dad's going to do the same thing, but he's also going to be very intentional to let them know that his relationship to his wife is going to last forever, and he's in.
I'll never forget hearing Pastor Tommy Nelson speaking at a conference we were doing where he said, I used to tell my boys, if we were ever out in a rowboat in the middle of the lake, a storm came up and the boat tipped over, he said, I want you to know what I would do. He said, I would get that boat flipped around. I would go get your mom. I would get her in the boat. I would dry her off. I would see if she needed some lemonade. I would make sure she was okay. He said, then I'd look back in the water. If you were still flailing, I'd come in after you. And, it can sound almost like he was being cruel to his sons. But there was a sense of security that came with those kids, knowing dad and mom are sticking together. With stepkids, it's a little different dynamic, though, isn't it?
That's right. But the kids need to know where dad's dedication is so that it settles the issue, so that they don't think there's room to divide and conquer.
I hate to keep beating this point here, but your children need to see you as a dad. Leave, cleave, become one. And I know the command in Genesis chapter 2 is leave father and mother. And you're not supposed to leave your children to cleave and become one. But there is a sense here in which you declare your loyalty. I like that word. You declare your first and foremost loyalty to your spouse. Those children need to hear that. They need to see that. They need to know that. And then what they're going to do after they've heard that, they're going to test that.
That's right.
They're going to test their dad to see if he really means it, and then he has to demonstrate it through his actions. What's another one of the things dads need to do?
He needs to trust his wife's heart. Something that will never happen in a two biological parent home. You may have a mom and a dad who disagree about parenting, but you won't have Dennis coming to his wife and saying, look, honey, I think grounding the kids for 6 months is too long. We need to shorten that down a little bit. And the reason you grounded our kids for 6 months is because you don't love them. That just doesn't happen in your household, does it?
Right.
You don't doubt her heart. You may not agree with her parenting move or strategy, but you don't doubt her heart. But in step families, there's a very dangerous line that oftentimes a dad can cross with his wife, and he calls into question not only something she did from a parenting strategy, but why she did it. And if he looks at her and he says, you don't love my kids, that's why you did such and such. Now, all of a sudden, she's being pushed to the outside, and even in terms of her intentions, her desires to be a helpful, loving parent figure in the life of these kids. That's a very dangerous place to go.
And a stepmom will often phrase that thinking in this way. She will say, my husband comes to me and says, you're the adult in this. They're children, you're the adult, or you're overreacting, or you're being too dramatic. When she is trying to set some boundaries or do something healthy for the children, when he doesn't trust her heart, very often the dad will come out with statements like that saying she's being overly dramatic. Now, the stepmom's got to take a step back and say, Am I being overly dramatic? Am I being a drama queen? Am I being unrealistic? Doesn't mean everything she's doing is right, but the way that the dad will often phrase that is not, I don't trust your heart, but it comes out in those other sentences.
And I can see how a stepmom would feel that way or begin to express those things because she can get wounded
Yes.
and get hurt deeply, and then everything becomes an emotional issue at that point with the kids.
Absolutely.
That's right. And she, at that point, is being accused of being wicked, which she knows she's not. She has the best intentions for these children. I mean, that's why step-parents do what they do. In our experience, step-parents are fabulous people. They love their stepchildren, and they are working for their best interests. And so a biological parent may disagree with it, what a step-parent does, but it's not because they have ill will towards the kids.
Right.
And so you just have to try to trust their heart. A third principle that we want biological dads to remember is that you need to take the primary parenting role with your kids. You have not married a new mother that you can just hand your kids off to. When you marry a woman and she becomes a stepmother of your children, you have to be the primary dad. You were primary during the single-parent years, and after the wedding, you're still kind of primary in terms of the affection, in terms of authority, in terms of discipline, and providing direction for the home.
Does that mean that the mom is the primary parent for her biological children?
If she has biological children, yes, she's the primary parent for her children. She's the primary go-to, especially if you're going to have a bit of a battle on your hands and you've got to say no or you're going to disappoint the children. We want biological parents primarily dealing with their kids, and the step-parent is gradually moving their role into taking roles with leadership and making decisions on discipline.
And you gradually move into those roles as you see that you have the clout? Is that how you do that?
Well, part of it for stepfamilies is as much as the child will let you in. A point that we haven't really hit on is I can only have as much of a relationship with my stepchildren as they will allow me to. You know, my husband can be the most wonderful dad and be the most disciplined and, you know, do a great job with his kids and do all the things right standing beside me as his wife, as his bride. But if the children continue to refuse to let me into their heart, then as a stepmom, that's really as far as I can go. So if they're going to stay a porcupine towards me as the stepmother, I have to just accept that and realize my relationship with my stepchildren goes as far as they will allow. Now, when they're younger, it may be to a certain degree. Then as they move into a little bit older, they may let me in a little bit more. They may not. There's no guarantee that at some point when they hit adulthood that magically they're going to start letting me into their life. So it really, the stepchildren dictate how much of a relationship I'm going to be able to have.
Is there a point where a stepmom has to so throttle back that she basically gives up on having an in-depth relationship with a stepchild?
I think that she does. I think there are definitely stepmoms that have to take a step back and say, my role is to be as godly of an example in front of them as I can, is to pray for them, and is to be a good wife to their father. And that's it. I may never get more than that.
And I would add that some life experiences may change the heart of the child and open them to the stepmother. And maybe when they have their own children, that all of a sudden they're humbled a little bit and they realize how great their stepmother really is. And now she has an opportunity. So she may back off of trying. She doesn't ever entirely give up, but she has to temper that based upon the openness of the child.
We haven't talked a whole lot about the biological mom in this equation. There are all kinds of different scenarios here. She may have passed away. She may live nearby or out of state. There may be visitation. There may be limited kinds of interactions. What should a stepmom's role be when it comes to a biological mom? You were one. How did you handle it?
Well, one of the things that I love about our book is that we really go into the different kinds of biological moms. Because how you relate as a stepmom to the biological mom if she is still alive, but even the memory of the biological mom if she's gone, really depends on how the biological mom responds to you. how she responds to your husband, how she responds to your family. And so we give different scenarios of the different types of biological moms and how to cope with and get along with. The goal should always be to try to get along with the biological mom as well as you possibly can.
This is where Romans 12:18 comes in. If possible, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men, right?
That's right. And that may mean taking the higher road. That may mean overlooking some cruel or nasty comments sometimes. That doesn't mean you allow that person, the biological mother, to treat you like dirt. It doesn't mean you're supposed to just roll over and play dead. But it may mean that for the sake of the children, you do what is best for them and brings the most peace into their life. For example, I had a stepmom just recently say to me, every time I go to my stepson's baseball game, the biological mom makes it very obvious that she does not want me there, that she doesn't think I belong there. She storms around the field, and it makes it very uncomfortable for my stepsons. And my advice to her was, don't go to the games. Even if your husband wants you. She said, my husband wants me there. And I said, you know what? You and he need to sit down and talk about this because it's causing tension for the child. Not that you're doing this for the biological mother. You're doing it because you can tell this is causing stress for the child.
Would you ask the child, let's say it's a 15, 16-year-old boy or a girl, and it's their game you're going to. Would you ask them what their opinion was at that point?
I would. I would probably have the dad and I together, not just the stepmom, but knowing that kids in divorce often do not tell you how they really feel. You have to always remember that. They often won't tell you exactly what they're thinking or how they're feeling. But if possible, to sit down with Joshua and say, Josh, it appears that your mom is really uncomfortable when I'm at your baseball games. Would it be easier on you if I didn't attend as your stepmother?
So you don't use it to trash. You don't trash the biological mom.
Never, 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 never.
And we'll always come back on the stepmother and work against her.
That's right. You always want to address the situation, not the woman, not the person.
You were pretty adamant, never, 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 never. What if a biological mom is doing stuff that you just feel like you've got to address with your stepson or stepdaughter, where you can't affirm or approve the behavior? You've got to speak up and say, that's just not right.
You absolutely do. You have to go to them and say, you know what, Joshua, I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that you're having that kind of turmoil in your home. That must make it very confusing to be at your mom's house and experiencing one thing, and then when you come in this house, you're doing something completely different. Let's talk about how that makes you feel. You don't ever go to, your mother is a bad mother because she's, allowing you to watch R-rated movies or whatever it is that you don't approve of. You don't attack the parent. You attack the behavior and the choices.
You were quick to say that it works against the stepmom.
It does.
When she says anything negative about the biological mom. What's behind all that?
Even if the kids agree with her, even if they realize their mom is being disrespectful and out of line, it emboldens their loyalty. And what that means is mom's going to be right. And if you try to step into her role, her place, if you try to criticize her, I'm going to take up for her and defend her. It's just what loyalty leads me to do. And so that will put me against you.
So even if mom is an alcoholic and she is, she's shown up drunk at school functions and embarrassing the child, if the stepmom comes along and starts to talk about, it's just not right for your mom to be drinking the way she is, you're saying the biological son or daughter is going to go, don't talk about my mom like that.
More often than not. There's always exceptions to that rule, but more often than not, what we would want the stepmom to do is have a spirit of grace about her. I think Laura is absolutely right. You have to speak to truth with children. And realize that sometimes that puts them in the middle. That puts them in a loyalty bind where they're trying to decide whose truth they're going to buy into. But I think we don't avoid truth, but we present it with a spirit of grace. So that stepmother, for example, in that situation could say, I'm sure it troubles you. I can see on your face it troubles you when your mom comes. And we want better things for your mother, and I pray for her all the time. That sort of softness, that sort of grace presentation allows you then to have some influence and to minister. And I'll use that word, minister, to the heart of that child that's struggling over their mother's alcoholism. And that affords you influence. But to stand up and say, oh my goodness, did you see your mother? What a disgrace. You will set that child against you.
And another thing, Bob, and using that example about the alcoholic mother, I think another thing that stepmoms can do is allow themselves to be really transparent in front of their stepkids. Now, you don't want to lay all your dirty laundry up, but for example, if I was dealing with that issue, I would say, you know what? When I was younger, I used to drink really heavily, and I'm sorry that I did that. And I know what it's like to be around people who are drinking too much, and boy, that must be really uncomfortable for you. I'm sorry you're experiencing that. Go to that level of compassion and sympathy with the child. Again, not bashing the mom, but relating to the child on what the pain that they're experiencing.
And if you didn't drink years ago, you can say, all of us have made
exactly
whatever kinds of choices that we look back on with regret. And we need to pray for one another here.
Here's the principle for stepmoms. When you extend grace, you get grace. When you criticize and get negative and try to exclude people from the life of the child, it tends to exclude you.
I'm sitting here thinking about the stepmom who's raising teenagers. And when the biological mom gets her time with them, they're walking into a situation where she's cohabiting. She's not married, and maybe she's cohabiting with a new guy every 6 months. And they're seeing these men come and go, some abusive, some not. And I mean, if I was a stepmom at that point, it'd be really tough to control my tongue.
Absolutely.
Are you telling me that a stepmom in that situation has to be filled with grace? Same thing, not criticize, keep her mouth carefully shut at that point?
She's going to be filled with grace, but I do think she has to speak truth. And by the way, I think she ought to work with her husband so that he's speaking more of the truths, more of the hard truth. Teaching his kids about purity, for example. If he says nothing about mom, but simply talks about sexual purity, his children are going to realize, well, my mom is not a sexually pure person. And that's a hard reality for them. It does put them in the middle. It creates that loyalty bind where they're going, but I love my mom, so how do I deal with this?
And they ask the question, what about mom? And so they put it point blank to you as a stepmom.
Well, and as we were saying, you don't avoid the truth. Like, for example, if that were happening in my family with my stepsons, I would say, you know what? Before I let Jesus love me and teach me how to have self-respect and love myself, I used to do things like you're experiencing with your mom. I totally understand why she thinks having these men come in the home and these relationships are meeting a need in her. It's helping her to feel good about herself. But you know what? Let me tell you that I tried that. It didn't work. And this is how I got healed from thinking that was going to fix me. Your mom's just trying to fix a deep hole in her heart in the wrong way.
Now let's talk about how we can love her and be an influence in her life. That softness continues your influence as a stepmother.
I like what you're talking about here because it's not a holier than thou judgmental attitude. It's
humility.
It is, and it's giving a blessing instead of an insult. 1 Peter 3, verse 8 and 9 really talk about being harmonious, sympathetic, kind. And it says, not evil for evil, not insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. And it says, to your point, Ron, for you were called for this very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing.
You've been listening to a Family Life Today flashback on the Family Life Blended podcast. I'm Ron Deal. Stepmoms, I sure hope you're feeling empowered in your role. That actually might not make sense when you think about some of the limitations of your place in the home, but when you realize just how much influence you do have through your heart and character lived out in front of children, you realize you're not powerless. You have to be strategic sometimes, but you have an important role to play, and with time, it will grow and grow. If you'd like more information about Laura Petherbridge, you'll find it in our show notes, or you can check it out on the Family Life Blended podcast page at familylife.com/blended podcast. You can get a copy of Laura and my book, The Smart Stepmom, wherever you buy your books, and I would encourage you to do just that. There is so much in that resource that we did not get to talk about. The show notes will tell you how you can get your copy. Hey, do me a favor, take 2 minutes to rate this podcast or give us a review. We love hearing from people. We heard from a couple stepmoms not long ago. One said, being a stepmom is hard. I've felt frustrated, alone, angry, resentful, trapped, miserable, anxious, misunderstood, and unequipped. But because of this podcast and Ron's books, I feel understood. I feel like I have a tribe, and I'm reminded that I am indeed not a failure. Well, I am so glad that you have gotten that message. Another stepmom declared this podcast to be transformative. She says, as a stepmom of 4, I really needed resources to navigate our marriage and blend well. I'm so grateful for the wisdom in this podcast. We want to do our hard well, and this has been an invaluable tool for us to do that. Well, I'm glad it's helping you, and we pray that it's helping others as well. If you're a regular listener, thanks for subscribing. And let me encourage you to think of someone that you could share this episode with. If you haven't subscribed yet, of course, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen on the new and improved Family Life app, which lets you take notes while you listen. And hey, if you're not familiar with Family Life Blended, we're a division of the International Ministry of Family Life. We have the largest collection of articles, videos, books, live conference events, and online resources for blended families in the world. And it's all available at familylife.com/blended. Come check us out. And remember to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Next time, we'll hear from Terry and Carol Moss and 2 of their adult children as they talk about blending and bonding in an adult stepfamily.
I want to go back with my kids and my wife and be able to go back home for Thanksgiving, and it's mom and it's dad, and oh, this is the room I grew up in. Let's drive to the school I went to. Like, I'm going to bring my family, and it's going to be my home.
That's the Moss Bunch, next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening, and thanks to our Family Life Legacy partners for making this podcast possible. You can help us produce this podcast and other resources by making a tax-deductible donation specifically for Family Life Blended by going to familylife.com/blended podcast and clicking the donate button, or just look in the show notes for a link. If you become a monthly partner, we'll send you a gift card to our Weekend to Remember marriage conference held throughout the U.S. and Canada. Our chief audio engineer is Keith Lynch. Bruce Goff, our producer. Our mastering engineer is Justin Adams. Project coordinator, Ann Ancaro. And theme music provided by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is produced by Family Life and is part of the Family Life podcast